So I am very happy to introduce Manal Al-Hajji from the University of Maryland. She has a bachelor's degree in architectural engineering and a master's in geospatial sciences and GIS applications from the University of Maryland. She has working experience with GIS products, SQL, and database management, and her most recent job was as a GIS specialist with the World Bank and the UN Habitat, which included work on the city's prosperity index for 17 cities to define, develop, and assess spatial data for 17 cities. So go ahead, Manal.
Okay. Today I'm gonna talk about my working experience mapping and validating indoor physical assets at University of Maryland Libraries by using the ArcGIS field map application. ArcGIS field maps combine many capabilities into a single app that is simple to deploy and easy to use. By using the Arc field maps, we can collect the data, capture locations, markup maps, navigate to our assets, and complete our assignments. So field maps allow the user to search the read-only maps and enable for editing by using their ArcGIS Online account. Also, the GPS accuracy at the field map is 17 feet, while it is 40 feet at the collector. The field map applications has some features like they have a light gray, non-editable fields, and they have the mandatory fields with the red colors and non-mandatory fields with the normal colors. By using these features, we guarantee or we will have more accuracy in the field work. Next. So here, if we look at these images, we can see the features and compare the collector with the field map applications. Next, please. This slide shows us the McKeldin Library floor plan feature classes, which we use them as the base maps for the data collections and validations. So McKeldin Library has 7 floors, and we did our survey and data collections and validations at all these 7 floors. At this slides, we can see the room, all the rooms, the data, we converted them to centroid. Then we used the field map to add the floor number and the room number, and we added some images for each point and each room were in our survey. Next. This is another example. How did we deploy our field data and by using the field map collections? These points are the stacks number. We converted them from polygons to points and used the field map to collect the data. So for example, here we added the stack number as a unique ID that we used it in our analysis and at the network analysis. And we add this number from the field by going to the library, looking at the bookshelves and add this number. Also, we added all the call numbers, the call number ranges from the field by using the field map applications. We define the asset types. So if it's stacks, folio, or others, we define the floor number and we capture some images for each point. So when we look at this floor plan, we see the green color is the validated data. The red color is the data that need to be validated. And the black color represent the data that are validated, but it needs some revision. This slide shows another capabilities of the field map applications, which is how to add the data. We don't have any map that shows the assets at the library. So we use the field map to add these assets at the points. We built our feature class. We built our fields by adding the domains and the category of each asset. Then we add the points, we choose the assets, we take some pictures, some images, and we define the floor number. And we have the options here. So if we need, if the data needs to revision, or if the data is ready to go. So we can also choose one of these options for our data validation. This is another example, how did we deploy the field map applications in our data collections. This is at the fourth floor of the library, we have a huge area of the map cabinet. So we converted the polygons to points, and we used the field map applications again to collect the data. We collected the cabinet number from the fields, and we use it as a unique number for our analysis or the network analysis. We captured some images. So when we look at this file cabinet, we will know what do we have inside this cabinet and what type of cabinets. We add also the floor number and the validation status. Next, please. Finally, these are some examples. Why did we validate and collect the data? In the first map, we see how did we deploy the network analysis. So the user is here. He wants to search for a book. He will connect to the server, and he will find the stack number. Then the network analysis will find the shortest way to go to the stack number to find his book. This is another example. The user is looking for a plotter or printer or any assets to use in the library. So he just search it at his mobile, and he will be connected to the library server. Then the network analysis will take him to the shortest way to this plotter, the required plotter. And the indoor network analysis work in two dimensions, the horizontal transitions and the vertical transitions. So it goes through the floors, each floor. If we're looking for we're at the third floor, and we're looking for some stacks at the fifth floor. So it will give us the route, how to go from transition from one floor to another, and how to go horizontally at the same floor to find the required block or assets or map. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manal. That was super interesting.
Oh, thanks.
All right, so if you have any questions, save them towards the end, or stick them in the chat and we'll get to them later. And we will move on to our next presentation. So up next, we have Dr. Crystal Bay. Dr. Crystal Bay is the Assistant Instructional Professor of GI Science at the Center for Spatial Data Science at the University of Chicago. She holds a PhD in geography with an emphasis in cognitive science from the University of California, Santa Barbara, and is a former postdoc of the Movement Data Science Lab at UCSB. Her research focuses on geographic movement visualization, real-world navigation and wayfinding, and the spatial cognition of neighborhoods and regions. Take it away.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. And so I will be talking about DynamoVis software today, which is exploratory data visualization software for movement. And this is work that I'm doing with the Move Lab at UC Santa Barbara. Okay, and so with the increase in GPS trackers and biologgers used to collect detailed data on animal and human movements, there are many scientists that collect or have access to movement tracking data, but need to explore this data in context, both with internal spatio-temporal movement characteristics and external environmental variables as well. Next slide. So in the spatio-temporal visualization of movement, it's important that we can effectively visualize aspects of information, including different characteristics for presenting, like conveying information, for exploration, data exploration to generate hypotheses, and the analysis and confirmation of hypotheses. So this software helps to support expert knowledge in terms of helping scientists assess movement patterns in relation to these environmental variables. as well as communicating information effectively by being able to easily change display parameters in order to highlight certain attributes of the movement data. And also to support not only aspects of individual data exploration, but also for collaboration with others and to support educators in teaching. Okay, and so DynamoVis is an open source standalone desktop software application. It's used to design and export custom animations and multivariate visualizations from movement data. We just released a full stable version of the software and published this paper in Movement Ecology last week. The software doesn't require any programming or GIS experience to customize the visualizations. And it allows users to help capture associations between movement characteristics, as well as the internal and external factors surrounding movement. This is a kind of a picture of what the interface looks like. And so the software is grounded in cartographic theory with a cartographic framework for movement, which we are also evaluating or assessing with user evaluation studies, and works well both for data exploration, scientific decision-making, creating animated visualizations of movement, and for teaching purposes in a GIS or cartography class context. And there's built-in video recording, so you can easily export static images resulting from the created animations or a dynamic animation as well. And so in this screenshot, you can see in A, you can input data and configure the animation to load the data and select which variables to include. B is the control panel on the left that shows how you can control different visualization parameters. So which attributes are displayed in the visualization and how, such as choosing between point and line displays or displaying some environmental characteristics such as wind speed with a vector, for instance. There's a timeline in case you're working with several different tracked animals. And also the main animation window is what you see in D. So you can easily change all of the display parameters associated with these GPS tracks. Next slide. And so the purpose of this is to support exploratory visualization. So to easily change display of parameters to look at the different impacts associated with environmental characteristics, anything that you might have an idea of what to explore with regard to its effects on movement behavior. And then it also allows users to easily understand how different geovisualization choices impact how we can communicate this data visually. So important for teaching as well. Okay, and then the place that we see for DynamoVis in GIS education is it can help students develop these important critical analysis skills that they're learning in their GIS courses. And that's applicable across all domains of data science. Yeah, and so this is important with regards to data representation choices. So how we decide to display certain parameters of movement, choices that we make in spatio-temporal mapping and analysis. So allowing for immediate visual exploration of the data and also it being very hands-on, as well as scientific communication. So how do we effectively present spatio-temporal movement data in a visual way? Okay, and I wanted to thank and recognize the NSF award that supports this project. And this is work as part of the MOVE lab at UCSB for movement data science. The best place to go if you're interested in looking at the software is either our GitHub page or to see the new released software article in Movement Ecology. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and congratulations on your article getting published. Okay, next. All right, next up we have Jaemin from the University of Maryland. He's a second-year graduate student at the University of Maryland in the Department of Geographical Sciences. In his undergraduate degree, he studied atmospheric science and GIS. While his research focus is mainly in satellite and remote sensing, he maintains GIS commitments with the University of Maryland Libraries GIS and Spatial Data Center. He enjoys working with others and incorporating GIS techniques to physical processes. Apart from the research showcased here at the conference, Jaemin is working on VERS nighttime imagery, supporting the team's research in the land cover land use change remote sensing. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Carolyn, for that warm welcome. I'm Jaemin. So this is a collaboration between ourselves and the University of Illinois. So we got kind of Big Ten West, Big Ten East going on. So good dynamic there. Our other collaborators at Illinois are Ashish Sharma. And we also have a high schooler on board the team, Tanish Katse, so making us all look bad, right? So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, this is a collaboration between the University of Maryland Libraries as well as UIUC. So our main focus is comparing the WRF, weather, and climate model, comparing those outputs with daily crime data from the city of Chicago. So the idea is that we want to identify heat stress locations and devise heat mitigation solutions that can help reduce violence. Our overall scientific goal is to analyze and identify seasonal patterns of crimes, as well as to identify those locations sensitive to temperature changes, which will of course be very important in the coming years with climate change and so on and so forth. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so crime in Chicago. Well, certainly most of us here know that Chicago has a certain reputation when it comes to crime, but really we don't really know, what about Chicago has that trend, right? So Chicago has overall a very high crime rate, much higher than the rest of the nation. And so, most researchers focus on other social elements, trying to explain why Chicago in particular has this problem, right? So Chicago does have some social factors, including, so here it's ranked 8th in the country in the largest cities for income inequality. Right, but overall, right, the reasons why it's high is not very clear. So what we're hoping to do is to try to identify specific areas within Chicago with high criminal activity that might be sensitive to changes in temperature. So on our next slide, so we have data from the Chicago data portal. I'm sure many of you here are familiar with the various geoportals out there. So a nice online repository to download some data. On the right, we have that data imported to ArcGIS as a point shape file. But when we download the data with all these points, right, I think it's on the magnitude of 400,000. It's not that meaningful. So we're going to have to do some GIS to process that data and make it a little more meaningful for our analysis. Okay, so here we have a data clock. So this is one of the newer features in ArcGIS Pro. But here we overlay the counts of crimes, bin them by their months, and have them modulated by their year. So already when we look at this graphic, we see some interesting patterns. We see that in the warmer months between April through October, we see very dark blues indicating higher counts of crime, right? So the idea being that there's two main hypotheses here. The first, people tend to be more aggressive when it's hot outside. I'm sure many of you have been stuck in traffic during the summer and might feel a little more annoyed than usual. Another one is if it's warmer outside, people are out doing more stuff, making the possibility of criminal activity go up. But it's nice to see that there already is some temporal pattern here, and we'll see this develop throughout the presentation. So we can go to the next one. Okay, so this is part of the ArcGIS space-time pattern mining tools. For those using the older versions of ArcMap, a few of these tools exist, but mainly these tools are being supported in ArcGIS Pro, with minor differences between the versions. But here we use the emerging hotspot analysis. And so I'm sure many of us who do GIS are familiar with spatial analysis, and we're good with identifying changes in space. But when we start incorporating changes in time along with that, it gets quite difficult. This tool helps us identify both at the same time. So here we can see, it's pretty intuitive. We see blue zones as being cold and the red ones indicating different types of hotspots emerging. So we can go to the next one. Okay, one of the problems we're going to have to overcome though is, so we have some census tracts laid out over our grid, right? So in the circle, it's going to be a little difficult to classify that. So we're working with Esri right now to make this analysis work. But the point being is this is still a developing tool. And so it's not an all encapsulating, thing that we can include in our workflows. But yeah, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so now we want to incorporate some climate models. So here we have a 1-year loop of the WRF climate output for the city of Chicago. And we see as it's progressing, we see the blues turn into yellows and the yellows turning into oranges, which is a nifty animation. So we can go to the next slide. So why a climate model? A lot of people hear the word model and get a little uncomfortable, and rightly so. But the reason we need to use a model is because there's a lot of spatial variability. And so we have an overlay of the city of Chicago in the red outline there, and we see that there's only 4 or so meteorological stations that we could possibly compare things to. So if we want to know what's happening, throughout the entire city and its many variations, we're going to have to use a model. So, okay, so this is our last slide. So here on the right, we have some graphics illustrating the relationships between crime as well as instances of temperatures. And we can see from these four plots that there is some sort of trend that follows with the both of them, right? So the question that we want to ask is if these relationships manifest stronger in certain locations over others. And we want to incorporate that at the census tract level. Alternatively, right, does this trend persist consistently across all areas in Chicago? And that's a very important question to ask, because if that's the case for Chicago, it's probably the case for other cities as well. And that's going to be very concerning with, rising temperatures with oncoming climate change. And so we're trying to more develop the climate side of things. And we'll present this again in another month at the American Geophysical Union. So hopefully we'll have an answer by that. So.
Thank you so much. Oh, I've gotten stuck in my PowerPoint. Okay, fourth, we have Dana Singh, who is a second-year master's student in the Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Science program with a major concentration in geoscience data at Purdue. She has also been accepted into the GIS certificate program, and she's working to augment her data analysis, visualization, and data handling skills, and GIS is a wonderful tool to help with that. Whenever you're ready, Dana.
All right. Thank you, Caroline. Just want to say I've really enjoyed everyone's presentation so far. So today I will be discussing how COVID-19 has influenced certain visitation and mobility pattern changes. Next slide. Okay, so it's pretty evident how COVID has affected us all in different ways, whether it be by travel restrictions or social distancing policies, both of which may have come into play for today's virtual conference. But here I wanted to demonstrate how COVID-19 has caused people to change the way they think about traveling. So just some background information on the data I've been using. I attend Purdue University, and so I wanted to focus on this area. So my focus is in Tippecanoe County. I used SafeGraph data, which is nationwide data consisting of 2 data sets, core places and mobility data. Core places is more like baseline information, so coordinates or regions of places of interest, while mobility data is more demographic information, like the amount of visits to a place of interest. So a lot more analysis is done here. So to follow the trend of COVID, I chose to look at 3 different years: 2019 pre-COVID, 2020 during COVID, and 2021, the present year. And I looked specifically at the month of April because this is the month where COVID restrictions really started to go into effect. So throughout my project, I focused on 3 main research questions and how COVID has influenced them. So do people change services based on location? Where do visitors come from? And how long do visitors stay at a place of interest? You can go to the next slide. Okay, so after filtering and cleaning a lot of data, we can look at my first research question. So through the help of my professor, Dr. Kong, we were able to perform a t-test comparing 2019 to 2020 and 2019 to 2021 for the education system category and restaurants. So in this top figure here, figure 1, we can see the average visits by business type in the education system category. So as COVID reared its ugly head in 2020, we can see this difference of schools and universities that are converted to more remote learning. And off to the right here, you have 3 maps for the 3 separate years, where colleges are represented in blue and schools are represented in pink. So following the plots, you can see that in April 2020, there are clearly less average visits represented. And it's starting to go slightly up in 2021, where people are starting to get more comfortable. So this bottom figure here, we're doing the same thing. We're finding the average visits, but of 3 subcategories of restaurants. So you have full service restaurants, limited service, and snack installments. So in 2020 and 2021, you have this spike in visits to limited service restaurants and snack installments. And I thought this spike can be interpreted as, people were being tired of cooped up in their house, but you can't fully go back to operational services yet. So they tried to go places without going too crazy in their house, You can go to the next slide. Okay, so now we can move on to my second research question I was talking about. Where do visitors come from? So following the implementation of COVID-19 restrictions, there was a significant decrease in representation of countries visiting Tippecanoe County in 2020 and 2021. So as you can see here, I just made some pie charts for each year. In 2019, there were 13 different countries with visitors in Tippecanoe County. Meanwhile, in 2020 and 2021, it just decreased. Only 3 countries in each year were represented. So this really emphasizes how much travel restrictions came into play, as a lot of international visitors and international students could not come back to the States for school. You can go to the next slide. So overall, the coronavirus epidemic has had a substantial, some might say unforgettable, impact on visitation patterns. To review, people definitely changed services based on location. As travel restrictions and social distancing policies were put into place, you have people who are not traveling as much at all or visiting places that are a lot closer to home. And as per the last slide, we saw an outstanding decrease of international representation, again, from 13 countries represented in 2019 to a mere 3 in 2020 and 2021. So thus far in my project, that's where I'm at, but I plan to do a lot more data analysis and visualization, especially for my second research question, where do visitors come from? And I want to do this by looking at census block groups, specifically those census block groups that include that place of interest. So here I have started this in Tippecanoe County. This is just 2019 data. So I think we can see that in 2020, there's going to be a lot less census block groups that are represented. And then in 2021, it's going to spike back up again because things are starting to get back to normal. In addition to that, I want to try to get to that third research question I talked about. How long do visitors stay at that place of interest? I think it could yield really interesting results if I was able to look at dwell times and see how many people visited a certain point of interest in that time range. I think this would be a really great representation of how social distancing policies are put into place. But that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dana. And we will have our last presenter. So, Tara Anthony is a GIS specialist and interim head of the Donald W. Hamer Center for Maps and Geospatial Information at Penn State University Libraries. She received her Master of Education at Penn State, a Master of Science at MSU in Geography, and an undergraduate degree in Geography from Colgate University. She has been at Penn State since 2013, providing individualized geospatial consultations to Penn State users. Prior to working in academic libraries, she worked in roles related to geospatial satellite imagery processing and collection. Take it away, Dana. I'm sorry, Tara, I'm losing my mind.
Thanks, Carolyn. You can go to the next slide as well. So I'll be speaking today about an ArcGIS Hub site that we have in our library, and just a little bit about ArcGIS Hub. So it's part of the Esri suite of applications, which is included in your educational licensing at many institutions. It's created through an ArcGIS Online organizational account, and it really allows you to configure a platform to communicate your data, other related applications, and other information to a community or audience. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So yeah, that's just like a recap of why you might be using ArcGIS Hub. I'm going to be showing some examples of one for our library, specifically our Maps and GIS unit, in which it aggregated some data and applications that we've made over the last about 6 years when we've been using ArcGIS Online. If you could go to the next slide. This just recaps a little bit about the timeline of when you're kind of exploring ArcGIS Hub. So we started looking into a little bit last spring. And then this past summer, I set up what you'll see as the ArcGIS Hub site. And then we just now recently have started to put the links on our websites, and then we'll be doing more promotion of it as well. If you could go to the next slide. I basically set up the kind of some screen captures of what different segments of the Hub site include. So you start off with putting a title, and you have an option to search content, which is also able to add other types of tags to it as well. So we start by looking at the featured data, which our Hub site includes many data sets created from items in our collection. Two main areas around Sanborn Fire Insurance maps and World War II maps. And if you can go to the next slide as well. We also have a section on featured applications and story maps. And this is a section that you can also choose kind of what's presented here in terms of the icons and what types of phrasing is used for the buttons. And so users can explore those. If you can go to the next slide. There's also a section for information for instructors. So you can add additional pages to a Hub site. And also we added a survey in case to collect some feedback maybe from users who do visit the Hub site, what types of data sets they might be interested in the future. I also added a section on our contributors. So this right now just shows the current employees within the Maps and GIS unit, including many of our part-time employees who've contributed to these projects as well. So if you go to the next slide as well. This shows examples of what that resources for instructors page includes information about topics, learning objectives, and some examples and other materials as well. So in case someone discovers our Hub site and wants to know more. If you could go to the next slide. This kind of just recaps the components of the ArcGIS Hub site that we went into. Again, there's other widgets that you potentially could be adding to the Hub site, but these were the ones that we wanted to start with initially, and then we'll kind of see in the spring if there's, depending on use, if there's any changes as well. A little bit next on content, so if you could go to the next slide. In terms of the Hub site itself, you identify content to be included in the search results. So it's based on a couple different things. It could be identifying the content via a tag. So I do have the materials tag with our name of our unit to locate that. And it's also added to a common group that that material is based in. And you can also search across content in ArcGIS Online. So items might be outside your organizational account if you have different organizational accounts or other accounts to keep track of. Because in our case, we have our main Penn State ArcGIS Online account, and we also had previously a libraries account, which we still have content in. So I wanted to make sure that those all were represented. If you can go to the next slide. This basically just shows also kind of what the internal backside looks like for the content library. So you can see your items that will be presented and included in types of search results. And speaking of search results, if you can go to the next slide, this also shows what that search results look like. You have the information about the item name and a brief description, and then what type of content is. A user could also filter on the side the different types of content and the source information as well. And if you could go to the next slide, this also just shows an example of what one of those items looks like. So in this case, it presents a Sanborn Furniture and Map Buildings, and then options that you have for it. So you can either create a map, a story map, view the data source, or see it in ArcGIS Online. But then you can also download it in different formats. And this is the kind of one of the key things too, in case users might be interested in using any of our data in different ways. So you can look at it in a CSV, a KML, a shapefile, or GeoJSON. So I just wanted to point some of those features out in case someone hadn't really used ArcGIS Hub sites before. And then if you could go to the next slide. Another key part is really kind of communicating to our users that we have this site available, and it really kind of aggregates many of our content. So we now have linked to it on the ArcGIS Online guide that we have at our library. And I'll be finding different ways to promote it with our users because we've had, as you can see, much content created over the last number of years that we want to make sure the users know that we have and are available for their research projects as well. And if you go to the next slide, that basically wraps it up. Thank you. And I'll also put the links to those resources in the chat too.
That was great. Thank you, Tara. And now we've got a small amount of minutes for questions. If anyone has any, please feel free to put them in the chat. I have questions actually, maybe while people are typing. My first question, Manal, when you guys are adding the range numbers for the call numbers for each item, do you ever have to change the range numbers if you're shifting books? Like I remember the last time I was shelving books, we would have to move sometimes the front range to the next shelf or something.
Yes, this is the idea of validations, because we exactly took what's existing in the library, you know, and we, as you said, it changed. So when we used the field map applications, we went through each stacks and we check what we have in our tables and make sure that they match what's the existing call numbers in the library. So we did validate. This is one of the main reasons of our validations, to check the tables or the attribute tables and make sure that they match the existing things in the library. Because we found, yes, there are many changes in the call numbers. As you said, sometimes they move, you know, but from one shelf to the other. And we did this validation by using the field maps applications, and we edit our data on the tables. We wrote some comments for the stacks that had these issues or situation.
So would you be able to update your application with would you be able to update the field maps? Let's say you bought a whole bunch of books in one specific call number and then you had to move everything else. Again, would you have to validate again?
Yes, we can validate this, and we can, yes. We went to a very detailed level of validations when we did our validations. So we went through each bookshelves, we looked at the stacks number, call numbers. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. And of course, it's not the individual team. I have Milan, he's my supervisor. He helped me a lot with this, and it's more teamwork with the validation process.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of work. Thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
We've got a question for Jaemin in the chat. Were you able to account for over-policing of communities of color or communities of low socioeconomic status and or unconscious bias in the police?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When we talk about this type of work with a lot of people, this is usually the first question we get, which is somewhat awkward for us to answer. I mean, our team, mostly, physical geographers. So I'll do my best to address it. So yeah, a lot of people have been been very curious as the certain social and political dynamics and how they play out. And so in previous research, we compared other social factors, looking at inequality, both at like economic inequality as well as racial inequality. But we did that more of analyzing how heat itself affects these things. So that's a very good question for you to ask, because that gives us that shows that people are interested in other things other than just the climate side of things. And so we originally developed this type of research as kind of as climate scientists, as physical geographers, can we maybe assist municipal officers, as well as police and other first responders? Can we begin to identify issues where this might be more problematic? Right, if things are more sensitive to temperature, right, we can identify those traps, right? So the first goal is to just identify those tracks, and I think the second part, it'll be nice for us to incorporate those elements and see some of the economic as well as the racial dynamics at play. So, great question.
Thanks, Jaemin. It looks like we've only got 2 minutes left, but Tara answered her own question on the side about the license. I have a quick question for Dana. Why was Moldova so popular in 2021 for visitors?
Right. I was also wondering the same thing for 2020 and 2021. I think it was Mexico and Moldova. I still have to do more analysis, but maybe it's due to like international students at Purdue, or that's what I would think.
Cool. Okay, maybe there's like a program or something. Awesome. Well, we are right at time here, so thank you so much to everyone who attended, and thank you so much to the speakers. Those were wonderful lightning talks, and thanks for answering questions at the end. We'll see you all in the next session.